everyone, I'm Apridoni. As a student of Introduction of Applied Linguistics 2018. This part of I'm gonna tell you about parts of and goals of a listening and speaking course. There are well-balanced language courses that consist of four roughly equal strands. Number one is learning through meaningful cues input. That is learning through listening and reading. Number two, there is learning through meaningful cues output. That is learning through speaking and writing. Number three, there is learning through deliberate attention to the language items and language features. That is learning through direct vocabulary study, grammar exercises and explanation, attention to the sounds and spelling of the language, attention to the discourse and features, and deliberate learning and practice of language learning and language use strategies. Number four, there is developing fluent use of non-language items and features over the four skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. That is becoming fluent with what is already known. These four strands are called meaningful cues input, meaningful cues output, language focus learning, and fluency development. It is through these four strands that learners achieve the learning goals of a language course, namely fluent control of the sound, spelling, vocabulary, grammar, discourse features, and of the language, so that they can be used to communicate effectively. The meaning for cues input strand involves through listening and reading using receptively. It is called meaningful cues because in all the work done in this strand, the learner's main focus and interest should be on understanding and gaining knowledge or enjoyment or both from what they listen and read. This trend only exists if certain conditions are present. Number one, most of what the learners are listening to or reading is already familiar to them. Number two, the learners are interested in the input and want to understand it. Number three, only a small proportion of the language features are unknown to the learners. Number four, the learners can gain some knowledge of the unknown language items through context clues and background knowledge. Number four, there are large quantities of input. Learning from meaningful cues input is fragile because there are usually only small gains from each meeting with a word, and because learning is dependent on the quality of the reading and listening skills and is affected by background knowledge. Because of this, large quantities of input are needed for this trend to work well. Compare with well-planned deliberate learning. Incidental learning through input is fragile and is dependent on large quantities of input to gain sufficient repetition. The meaning for cues output trends involves learning through speaking and writing, using language productively. Typical activities in these trends include talking in conversation, giving a speech or lecture, writing a letter, writing a note to someone, keeping a diary, telling a story, and telling someone how to do something. The same kinds of condition apply to meaning focused output as aptly to meaning focused input. Number one, the learners write and talk about things that are largely familiar to them. Number two, the learner's main goal is to convey their message to someone else. Number three, only a small proportion of the language they need to use is not familiar to them. Number four is the learners can use communication strategies, dictionaries, previous input to make up for gaps in their productive knowledge. There are plenty of opportunities to produce. Many spoken activities will include a mixture of meaning-focused input and meaning-focused output. One person's output can be another person's input. Language focus involves the deliberate learning of language features such as pronunciation, spelling, vocabulary, grammar, and discourse. The term language focused learning is preferred because terms like focus on form and form focused instruction are misleading in that they can involve a deliberate focus and meaning as well as form, and need not involve instruction but can be the focus of individual autonomous learning. There are conditions for meaning focused input and output. There are conditions for language focused learning. Number one is the learners give deliberate attention to the features. Number two, the learners process the language features in deep and thoughtful ways. Number three, where there should be opportunities to give space, repeat attention to the same features. Number four, the features which are focused on should be simple and not dependent on development knowledge that the learners do not have. Number five is the features which are studied in the language focused learning and strands should be also occur often in the other three strands of the course. Becoming fluent in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The fluency development strands should involve all the four skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The learners aim to receive and convey message. Number one, all of what the learners are listening to, reading, speaking, or writing is largely familiar to them. That is, there are no unfamiliar language features or largely unfamiliar content or discourse features. The learners focus on Number two, the learners focus on receiving or conveying meaning. And number three, there is some pressure or encouragement to perform at a faster than usual speed. Number four, there is a large amount of input or output. The purpose of such a listing is to make teachers more analytical about their use of techniques and the design of programs. As we shall see, one technique can achieve several goals, and at times it may not be obvious to the learners what the goal is, as their interest may be on the message involved the activity. I think that's all for me from me. uh, Thank you.